My understanding was that the WorldWide Wednesday participants had expressed an interest in or a wish to perhaps focus a little bit more on cultural issues in the city region, in the Merseyside area. And I understand that you were hoping to have here tonight the head of... what was it, Mary? The head of...
It was the Director of Culture for Liverpool.
Yeah. She can't make it, so you've got me instead.
You get her next one.
Okay, be careful what you wish for. Okay, so what I want to do this evening is, I'm not going to give you a sort of cook's tour of my neck of the woods. I say my neck of the woods, it's where I'm politically active. Southport's a town I've known since my youth, but I'm not, as locals call, I'm not a sandgrounder. So this isn't a cook's tour to say, you know, these are the wonderful artistic and cultural experiences you can access in Southport and Sefton. What I really want to do tonight is to sort of challenge you to think, and perhaps this will set a theme for future WorldWide Wednesdays when you may wish to explore this theme a little further. So I just want to reflect on what art and culture is, you know, housing access, are there some barriers to participation, and what are the sort of typical experiences of ordinary people in terms of their cultural and artistic life in a place like Southport and in the wider borough of Sefton. So I was actually born in Preston and brought up there, and this will give my age away a little. In those days, you would catch a direct train from Preston to Southport, and this was before, some of you remember a certain Dr. Beeching who had a massive cull of the railways in the early 60s. And the Preston to Southport line went. But when I was a child, one of the great joys of our family life was to get on the train, come to Southport, and experience some of its culture. And for me, that culture was perhaps visiting the model village, or ice cream on the beach, or something like that. A little later, as I got into my teenage years, I went hopped on the train and gone to watch football at Hague Avenue in Southport, watch Southport FC. And now, as an adult with a family and children, our cultural experience is slightly different in Southport. We might go to the theatre or go to a show, or perhaps go and visit an exhibition and so on. So I'd like to think that my cultural experience of a place like Southport perhaps reflects the sort of typical experience of most people in the town. If you have an interest in culture and in the arts, you know, somewhere like Southport, and you know, I'm sure it is not untypical, and the borough of Sefton is not untypical of other boroughs in the Merseyside area. There is, you know, a lot you can access, and you know, a great deal you can do, but a lot of that hinges on a number of factors, not least whether you have the wherewithal to access those culturally enriching experiences. So just to look at what there is, to set the context, in Southport we have the excellent Atkinson, and people here been to the Atkinson?
Brilliant.
It is. It's a fantastic centre. It's a local authority run by Sefton Council very well. It has an excellent year-round programme of activities, of shows, concerts, productions, exhibitions, lectures and so on. A really good centre. I'm not sure how many Southport residents, you know, cross the threshold. I don't have any stats, but it's a well-used centre. I think perhaps for those Southport residents who don't take advantage of what's there on their doorstep, I wonder whether that's perhaps not a failure on their part, but a failure on our part and on the part of government to give people the sort of the tools and the wherewithal to access local cultural activities. And I'll come back to that in a minute. Much more likely, perhaps, than that sort of formal access to places like the Atkinson, I suspect, having sort of looked at the borough, is participation in a whole range of community-based clubs and societies. And for me, this seems to be what's at the cultural heart of a place like Sefton. And wherever you go, whether that's Southport or Bootle or Crosby, Formby, Muggle, there are literally scores of these societies where people are coming together to experience the things in which they're interested, which enrich their lives, whether that's art, music, drama, book clubs, this is the cultural life of many of our communities, and it exists outside of formal structures. And I have to say, even if our state was so minded, even if councils were resourced and minded, to fund the whole range of cultural activities in their communities, I think still we have a fantastic model for cultural enrichment through the sort of clubs and societies that people come together to form and share their passions in. So wherever you go in Sefton, and I'm sure it's the same for the boroughs in which you live here, those sorts of clubs and societies are the heartbeat of the cultural life of those communities. Other things, of course, that are going on, the Southport Festival annually, a festival of art and music and comedy and drama and so on. Crosby has its own arts festivals and so on. So on a formal level, there's a great deal going on. And of course, I can't not mention one of the great pieces of public art in the country that we have right here on our doorstep. Anthony Gormley's another place there on the sands at Crosby. So the range is broad. There's a great deal on offer, but I have some concerns. My experience in accessing what's out there, it does prompt the question: what constitutes the arts, and who's the arts for? Who's it aimed at? Who participates? At a time when many people's concern is putting food on the table, or hoping that you can get a GP appointment sometime in the next 2 months, or raising money for funds for your local school. Arts and culture ranks pretty low in people's priorities, and it's also the case that what we might traditionally define as participation in the arts and what's culturally valuable is often determined by. It's not the everyday experience of most people visiting art galleries and theatres, but it's often determined by your upbringing, your relative wealth, and perhaps even what school you went to. So people's cultural experiences differ significantly depending on those factors. And I suspect that my journey through the cultural landscape of Southport probably reflects that of most citizens. Passing by, popping in, sampling things, revisiting, possibly, maybe not revisiting, and so on. And the pity is that people aren't able to immerse themselves more in the cultural life of their communities, because often they lack the tools to do so. They lack the information or the inspiration, which many of them may have got from our upbringing or school, and perhaps they lack the confidence as well. They think that these sorts of activities maybe aren't for them. Museums and art galleries, not for me. Stuffy places, not sure I can go in there, not sure I can cross that threshold. So I think there are some cultural barriers to accessing a range of cultural provision. I mentioned family and upbringing as key factors, but it's probably the case that so much of what passes forward for culture and the arts, seems to some people to belong to another era and probably belong to another class, actually, if I'm being honest. And in terms of where it ranks in people's priorities, some of you may be familiar with the work of Abraham Maslow, the psychologist, and his hierarchy of needs. Now this is particularly, I think, resonant today, and certainly has been for the last 10 years in times of global recession, in times of austerity, when many people struggling to satisfy their very basic needs, and what he calls self-actualization, and that is that sort of participation in accessing culture and the arts, that time to indulge yourself in your passions, to do something for the sake of doing it, to do something because it brings you joy and it's not for personal reward as such. That's right at the top of his pyramid of personal needs, and many people don't get there when their day-to-day existence is about putting bread on the table, as it were. So too many of our citizens are preoccupied with those day-to-day needs to indulge themselves with Maslow's sort of self-actualization. So how do we address those concerns? If people are unable to access that range of cultural opportunity that is out there, how do we address this? And particularly, how do we address it in an era of of Brexit and austerity and school funding cuts. And I mentioned those three things because I think they all actually have an impact on the cultural life of our communities. And I have to say, you know, that I come at this as someone who thinks that, you know, having cultural enrichment is a key to the well-being and health of individuals and communities. And without that, you know, people's lives the lives of communities are that much poorer. So, you know, how do we address those issues? And I guess it's fair to say, and I say this with some hesitation because my party was a member of a government that made significant cuts in public expenditure, and austerity undoubtedly has affected the ability of local councils to be the promoter and provider of cultural activities. And you know, when you're strapped for cash as a council, you're probably going to close your libraries and perhaps trim your sort of arts provision rather than cut adult social care for, you know, vulnerable adults or cut social care for children and so on. You know, so councils are faced with tough choices, and faced with that, a lot of councils have reduced their provision. Or they've closed venues, or they've outsourced it, and often the result of outsourcing is that provision is reduced or made less accessible and perhaps more expensive. So, you know, there are undoubtedly issues for local authorities that, you know, austerity has caused and has reduced provision as a result. I think the situation in our schools is probably familiar to most of you here. Even if you haven't got school-aged children, school budget cuts are having and not just the budget cuts actually, the rigour of the national curriculum and teaching to that curriculum and having to get yourself into league tables and so on. All of that mitigates against some of the good work that schools have always done to inspire children and to give them a love of the arts. That is another issue for us. I think a couple more things that are also making our cultural lives less rich. There are some issues of accessibility, and yes, I mean physical accessibility perhaps for people with disabilities, but I think culturally as well. Not all provision is culturally relevant to some groups in our society. You know, there are some fairly fixed views about what art is and what culture is, and sometimes it doesn't reflect the diversity of our communities, and you know, so some people are almost excluded from that by default. And I should say another issue around accessibility is transport. You know, not all culture is there on your doorstep. So sometimes, you know, you need to be able to hop on a bus. I think in that respect, Sefton is pretty well served. You know, very good local public transport system, very good access to Liverpool here. You know, coming out of the different parts of Sefton Borough and all the fantastic cultural opportunities that exist in this great city. Less good if you're going north. I think the links between Sefton Borough and, for example, the city of Preston aren't great. But public transport can be an issue for people who wish to access artistic or cultural events. And then Brexit. I mean, I can't let this go without Brexit. I thought, you know, I'm not working it in, you know, because of the audience. But I do think, I mean, I ask myself the question, is Brexit really going to impact on the cultural life of our country? And I think the answer is actually yes. You know, when we become a less diverse, more insular country, less outward-looking, you know, I think that does impact on the cultural life of the nation. And I certainly think there's a practical implication that you know, if many of us, and as many of us do, believe and fear that there will be what people call an economic shock of Brexit, that means that the squeeze on local councils will continue, and it means that people will have less money in their pocket to spend on art and on culture. So that was a sort of bit of a rambling tour around the theme. I was given the brief that these were 10-minute talks in which I had to make 5 points. Okay, so just in case you haven't picked up the 5 points in that 10 minutes, let me summarise them for you. The first one is this. I think what I'm trying to say here is let's not be snooty about art, about the arts. Let's be broader in our definitions, and let's have more inclusivity. You know, let's enable people from a whole range of diverse backgrounds to feel that there is something out there for them that can enrich their lives. I think secondly, my second message will be, let's recognise that people face very real barriers in their daily lives to accessing things that would make their lives richer, that they perhaps don't feel are relevant to them, and they certainly don't feel they have time to squeeze them into lives which are dominated by those very routine day-to-day needs about, looking after your kids, staying in a job, affording the shopping bill, and so on. Wouldn't it be great if we can get to the stage where those issues become less and less for the majority of our population, and they are then able to sort of climb that pyramid that Maslow identified and reach those levels of self-actualization. Third point is this, that some of us here are in public life, in whatever role that might be, teachers, or civil servants, or local government officers, or minor politicians. And I think we have a responsibility. I think our responsibility is to do whatever we can, and with the power and resource and time that's given us, to create an agenda for public art, for the public being able to access the arts and culture in their communities where they live. So that's an agenda for all of us who have that responsibility and that opportunity. I think the fourth thing I wanted to say was that just a recognition that the cultural life of communities often revolves around these clubs and societies. And as I said before, even if the state was able to fund, and local authorities were able to fund, endless opportunities for local people to explore and be inspired and learn new interests and skills and so on. I think clubs and societies still form a very good model. They are really empowering. This is where people take power for themselves. They don't rely on others. They come together because they have a mutual passion. And I think we should do everything we can to support those groups. And the fifth message was Southport and Sefton has some great cultural activities going on, so go explore. And just to round off, I'll just say this, I look forward to a time when austerity is over, when councils can once again rediscover their mission to enable the people that they serve to enrich their lives through art and culture. I look forward to a time when schools are perhaps liberated a little from the economic pressures that they face and from the curricular pressures that they face, so that they can take generations of children and help to inspire them with a passion for art and music and drama. And I look forward to a time when this country is confident enough in itself, actually, to feel that it can embrace cultural diversity in all its magnificence, with people coming into Britain from all over the world and contributing to a sort of very diverse cultural offer. And because I'm an optimist, I feel those times will come back. We are the sixth wealthiest nation in the world, as we were this morning, could be seventh tomorrow, I don't know. Art and culture is for everyone, isn't it? I think it should be. Okay, thank you.
Certainly is. Thank you.